Jeanette Berry, and I'll be here monitoring the chat today during our presentation. And we're really excited to have our amazing registered dietitian here today, Marcie Grosvenor. And she's been with VA for what, 12 years, Marcie? Is that right? Wow. Oh my gosh. So 15 years between a few different VAs. And so we're really lucky to have Marcie here at our VA now. And um, so we had received this specific topic request from the Wellness Challenge participants for people who are looking for resources for the anti-inflammatory diet or Mediterranean diet as one of the options for an anti-inflammatory diet. And so Marcie graciously jumped on it and is here today to present. So Marcie, I'm going to hand the floor over to you and stop sharing my screen. We are recording today, and I'll keep an eye on the chat again for any questions that may come up and show those your way, Marcie. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeanette. I'm super excited to be here. Thanks for having me. I just want to make sure my sound is coming in okay.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Thank you. So I am going to share my screen. I'm borrowing a presentation from another VA dietitian. So I like the idea of not recreating the wheel. So hopefully that should be popping up here.
Yeah.
It is? Okay, with like a flame. I'm not seeing it.
Yeah, uh-huh.
Okay, perfect.
If you can make it full screen, that'd be even better.
Oh, yes. Well, can I?
Yeah, that one. Yeah, that one. Will that work?
I think so.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Marcie.
Yeah, I forgot. I haven't used Teams in a while to present. I'm used to using VVC. But thank you. I'm going to see if I can just... Uh-oh. Is that coming in okay?
I see your acute inflammation, and then now
Okay.
the what is inflammation with the flame slide. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, I might be a little bit rusty here with the sharing of screens, but we'll get through it. Mainly, I'm just using these for a little bit of a guiding point for our discussion today. But we were going to talk today about, like Jeanette said, basically ways to maintain our health as we age. So inflammation is a big topic that comes up basically with all prevention of basically all disease states. But I also wanted to just throw in a little bit about how we can also maintain our metabolic health through muscle retention as well. So we're not going to spend too long on this slide, but just to give us a little peek. You can think of inflammation as like those flames kind of depict on that first slide, sort of a smoldering flame in our bodies that can be either stimulated and made to grow worse and bigger, or we could maybe dampen that fire and kind of reduce that flame from spreading throughout our body. So that's kind of the whole gist behind the anti-inflammatory way of eating. So here we're looking at things that increase inflammation in our bodies, like infections, any type of foreign bodies, various immune reactions. And then we have this cascade of reactions in our bodies where our body is producing all of these chemicals and enzymes to help us fight that inflammation or sort of acute injury. And then it can turn to chronic inflammation where there's just this ongoing stimulus, like maybe rheumatoid arthritis or maybe chronic injury that just isn't getting better. So we're just having kind of that ongoing secretion of those inflammatory mediators that produce it makes our body do a lot of work when we're inflamed. So it kind of leads into a couple of things as we age. First, we want to think about all of these different diseases that are sort of rooted with inflammation in some way. Autoimmune disorders, I think, are pretty well known, but I don't think everyone thinks about diabetes or cardiovascular diseases. Even kidney disease brings on a form of inflammation in our bodies. So we can go both ways where we're kind of turning up the dial, or we can sort of turn down the dial with a lot of our behaviors. I'm going to take it out of that full screen so that I can see my screen again. I'm sorry. That was just a little hard for me. So we want to think about ways that we can both reduce the inflammatory stimuli by choosing foods that are not going to promote further inflammation. We want to also find ways that we can avoid those inflammatory foods from the beginning. So we know that inflammation is sort of this ultimate destroyer. And if we can just kind of like stifle that a little bit with our behaviors, they all cumulatively make a difference. It's not one food that's going to make the difference or one particular behavior, but it's the additive cumulative effect. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen and I'm going to hop over and share the handout that I popped into the chat already. And there should be a few links there. We're going to look at this handout together. And this is a handout that we use with our veteran patients as well. Just looking for the right thing to click on. Plate, where are you? And if you have that in your chat, you can always pull up that plate that I'm trying to share too, very clumsily here. Actually, I know. Just open this one. So on the anti-inflammatory plate, there we go. We're looking at healthy fats in the blue, healthy repairing proteins in our orange, and color and fiber throughout. And those are not going to be a surprise to anyone here, I'm sure. When we talk about color and fiber, we're thinking of just of all the different varieties of fruits and vegetables out there, nuts, beans, seeds. And we're going to see a lot of crossover between our proteins and our fats, as well as some of our proteins and our carbohydrates. So this kind of is a little bit different look from that traditional healthy plate. If any of you guys are familiar with that standard healthy plate, this is kind of taking it one step further or a couple steps further. So it's worth noting that we're getting a lot of benefit stifling those flames of inflammation in our body from spices. This is evident through different cultures that we've observed having lower rates of heart disease and lower rates of basically all diseases. They're using many and many different seasonings and spices that are just natural. We're not using lots of syrups and sauces and pre-made things. We're using just natural ingredients to make a lot of our seasonings and spices with an anti-inflammatory menu. And then also hopping over here to the fats, we'll look at these in more detail, but notice it's talking about the health promoting fats. This is one that can really turn the dial up or down. We can have fats that kind of stoke the flames or fats that can help bring that down. And the fats often travel with their friend protein. So when we think about proteins, we often think about meats like animal flesh, chicken, poultry, fish, beef, pork. And those can have varying degrees of inflammation based on how they're raised, where they came from, and so forth, how much fat's in them. And then color and fiber we'll look at below here too. Also, I just want to point out unsweetened tea and coffee are healthy beverages. It's generally the things that we're putting in our coffee and tea that are really bringing up the inflammation, like the food colorings and sweeteners and just different flavorings. So we're going to skip here. And now we're looking at that color and fiber part of the plate that just briefly, I'm going to scroll back up. We saw that this takes up a good majority of the plate. Little over half the plate is going to be coming from this green category of just different, you may know some of these foods as carbohydrates. So we've got our whole grains, fruits, legumes, starchy vegetables, those would all be considered carbohydrates. The fruits, whole grains, legumes, and starchy vegetables. These words, carbohydrates, get kind of a bad rap in some of today's diet information that you may come across in the kind of the commercial space. But notice that these whole foods are just that. They are whole foods. They're not processed carbohydrates. That's really where we want to get away from, is more of the processing. So it's not the corn or the winter squash or the watermelon that's causing us to have inflammation and other health problems in our country and worldwide. It's really those processed forms of those foods. So think about that when you first hear carbohydrate. You might have got a little scared, but think about really trying to look at these whole sources. Over here are our non-starchy vegetables. So these are going to not have a lot of carbohydrate. They, just as the name says, they are non-starchy. So that starch is not present. They primarily are made of fiber and water. And so these foods contain very little calories. These foods are just pretty much there to provide the antioxidants and the other nutrients that can help fight inflammation. So it's not all inclusive when you look at these lists, but just as an, to zoom in a little bit more, the cruciferous vegetables, in case you're not familiar with that word, would include your cabbages, your cauliflower, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, so any type of those kind of varieties are especially good for anti-inflammatory. We see our dark leafy vegetables, that's no surprise. Fermented veggies, so things like kimchi or sauerkraut are great, nutritious for the vegetable component themselves, and then the fermentation brings in some extra nutrient. Peppers, mushrooms, root vegetables like rutabaga, carrots, turnips, there can be some degree of starchiness in those root vegetables, but they are primarily pretty non-starchy. So again, if you're looking at your calorie intake, these non-starchy vegetables are all super low in calories. I want to point out a couple things with the starchy vegetables and the legumes down here in kind of the middle bottom of the green box. This is where we're getting some protein too. So when we hear the word plant proteins or plant-based proteins, this is what we're talking about. You can get a lot of protein from all these different legumes. You don't need to worry about, picking one bean that's better than another. I think the name of the game with anti-inflammatory and just good nutrition in general is to have a variety. So there's good nutrition in green peas. There's good nutrition in lentils. Just mixing them up, hopefully with things that you actually like. So you're going to get a good deal of protein from these. So I'm going to scroll back up for a minute and we're going to look at that plate again. So repairing protein here in the orange, we actually could consider those beans and legumes and green peas as part of these repairing proteins. What's not present in these legumes and beans is fat. They have no fat. They are just comprised of starch and protein primarily and good fiber. So definitely you want to consider those plant-based proteins in your repairing proteins. And that's why you see them over here again in the orange. So here up top in this orange column, we've got beans and legumes. And then we see our nuts and seed butters down here too, as far as other kind of plant proteins. When I say plant protein, I don't necessarily mean artificially made meat. So there's a lot of different products out on the market right now. So I just like to kind of really specify plant-based is becoming a word that can take on its own meaning. It can be used however a person wants to use it almost. So plant-based in the context that I mean is where you can still see what those things are. If you have a plant-based, let's say hamburger patty alternative, it might have beans in it and mushrooms and legumes and maybe some flax. It's probably going to be made of all those plant foods, maybe even some corn. But I'm not talking about a hamburger that looks like regular hamburger meat. It's presented as regular hamburger meat, but it's made of something entirely different. That would be something that's really highly processed. So again, we kind of just want to be able to understand what's in that food. If we can read the name of it and we can understand what it says black beans and corn, I know what that means. But if we start getting into some of the longer kind of chemically modified foods, that's where we're looking at more inflammation in your body. Here's all those great spices and herbs that I mentioned. Again, this is not every single one under the sun, but it's pretty cool to know, just even black pepper, cinnamon, garlic, things that we probably are using quite a lot in most of our common cooking. We can get more benefit from just even more of it. Um, s- Sliding over here to our healthy fats. Now, again, I'm going to come up and look at our plate real quick. So we see our healthy healthy fats have a little bit smaller placement on the plate. We want to use those kind of thoughtfully, not necessarily with caution, but use the ones that you really enjoy and the ones that are really going to help promote that lower inflammation in your body. So healthy fats can come from all of these different types of nuts that you see listed here, as well as seeds like chia seed, flax, and it's recommended to grind the flax like in a coffee grinder, or you can buy it already ground. These other hemp, pumpkin, sunflower seeds, and then we see our oils, healthy sources of fats from avocado oil, coconut oil, or virgin olive oil. And then with some of these, it'll say no heat. So you really want to also pay attention to that. The heat that we're cooking these oils to can also cause inflammation. So olive oil, you want to keep at lower temperatures, as well as those listed there, the flax and the hemp. Um, so that they're not oxidizing and causing more inflammation in your body. Some healthy fats that you could just eat as the real food would be the olives and the avocados, in addition to those nuts. And then lastly, over here, the final thing we haven't talked about yet are these animal proteins, things like eggs, these varieties of fatty fish, cold water fatty fish. You don't need to overdo it with fish because we do know there is such a thing as mercury contamination, which can then turn the dial on inflammation again. So you kind of want to keep that moderate. If you're consuming fish that are listed here, you're not going to be exposed to as much of the mercury. The fish that are eating other fish are the ones that really have the most. So think of swordfish and shark, some of the larger kind of prey fish. Um, we get a lot of benefit from fermented dairy as well, like yogurt and kefir. You don't have to eat these if you don't tolerate dairy, but those are a good source if you do. And looking here at the whole soy, I know there's a little bit of controversy or maybe just different messaging about soy. Soy in its whole unadulterated form, like a soybean or tofu, or even these lightly processed tempeh or natto, are not the source of the major inflammation. What is giving us major inflammation is the texturized soy protein, which is what some of those fake meats are made out of, or hydrolyzed soy protein that can be put in protein bars and protein powders. So if you're using a lot of supplements like soy milk, protein shake, protein bar, and they all have soy, you could start to get maybe more than your body needs. So try to aim for those whole sources. And if you're using protein powders, you probably want to shoot for something like a pea powder. They're making that from green peas, or a whey powder for a little bit less inflammation. And then on the very, very bottom, meat, poultry, seafood, those are all going to have a different effect based on how you cook it, how much fat is in it. But largely, in summary, the meats that are in the wild, like wild game, buffalo, those are not going to have the same inflammatory effect. They have very little inflammatory effect versus our meats that are produced sort of commercially, where they're exposed to a lot of hormones, vaccines, small spaces. They're going to be providing more inflammation, both from just the fat in their meat, the things that are stored in the fat in their meat. So a big one, if you don't have access to all the wild game and all that natural stuff, a big one is just thinking about your portion. Maybe not, going too big on those portions. Right there is a way that you can reduce your inflammatory sort of footprint off the bat. So I'm gonna
Hey,
pull.
Marcie.
Uh huh.
We have a question comment from the chat from Scott. I'm guessing the Impossible Burger is considered this processed plant burger. He has not had one, but sees it as an option. So, any more comments on the Impossible Burger?
That's yeah, I would say, it's a treat, kind of like as we started out, like not one thing is going to make or break your plan. But if you get rid of all animal proteins and you're having an Impossible Burger every night for dinner, then that probably is not going to be a very healthy choice. But that is what I'm talking about, where it's probably made from some kind of textured um, soy protein or alternative. So yeah, good question.
Moderation is key and looking at the ingredients.
Mhm.
Thanks, Marcie.
Yeah. Looking at that ingredients list. But yeah, every now and then, I think it's arguable sometimes if that's worse than maybe what you're getting from that feedlot beef that they're serving. So it could be a toss up. But it's certainly unfortunate when folks change their whole plan to do something that they were told is less inflammatory, and it can be misleading. So I think people have gotten the gist too about inflammation. I want to put it in the way that I describe it or I'm sorry, not inflammation, processed foods. I think people are hearing the kind of the dangers of processed foods and some of the drawbacks, but just quite literally, another way of thinking about a processed food is, can I trace this back to where it came from? If I'm drinking this cup of milk, I can trace back it came from a dairy. And maybe that dairy was not in Idaho, but you can kind of think, how far did this thing travel? How many hands or how many processes did this food item go through since it left the farm? So we can really look at this in so many ways by, looking at the ingredients list and looking at all the language used on the packaging. But by and large, the longer that list gets, the more you can assume that food is contributing an inflammatory punch. So it's probably not a surprise that you see some of these these foods listed here. I think it should be showing these foods to limit on the anti-inflammatory handout. So we're seeing all these ingredients like aspartame, saccharin, sucralose, all these artificial sugars. So rather than, I don't really recommend that people go and memorize this list. You can just assume that the more of these chemicals that are put into your food, the less healthy it is, the more inflammatory punch it has. So don't think that you need to memorize this. I think the nutritional strategy is always to think about what to eat more of. So I pasted this handout in the chat so you guys could have it, and I really would encourage, really making the focus up here, up top. When you're thinking about how you can get more non-starchy vegetables and whole grains and legumes, you're just going to automatically pick a little less from another category, probably. So it kind of helps just push those other foods off your plate, the ones that you're kind of trying to take less of. So lastly, I'm going to switch gears just slightly. And we're going to talk just briefly about muscle mass retention. But before I do that, please do, if you have any other questions about the inflammatory picture, let me know. And also, please visit those links that I posted in the chat. Okay, so muscle mass, what's the best oil for cooking? I think you're probably going to cover your bases well with avocado oil, and a canola oil that's processed in a good way. Actually, that one's not really listed here. I would stick with the avocado oil as probably the main one. Jana, thank you. So as we age, we are going to lose muscle. That is just a fact. So we can sort of reduce how much muscle we're losing when we age by controlling our inflammation. as we mentioned, all of those kind of things at the very beginning that can cause inflammation. Think about that inflammation sort of chewing up muscle tissue as well. So just by stifling your inflammation, you can help retain some muscle as you age. But it's also worth noting, because I like to point out that that is something that changes our weight and changes our susceptibility to different chronic diseases as we age, as we start, as our metabolism starts changing. So just knowing that it's natural to lose muscle as we age is important. So we want to think of what can we do to fight back against that. We can make sure we're getting enough protein, and we can also do resistance training. I had found a nice little guide for implementing new resistance training, that I will slap into the chat here. Um, but you could eat protein all day long, and as long as if you're not doing any resistance training, you're not going to be able to let that protein do its job in helping you keep muscle. So we mentioned a lot of those healthy proteins on the list just then. So I wanted to start with that first, so that you know which proteins you really want to focus on when you're trying to increase and get enough protein in your menu. But there is guidance that older adults probably need to try to get a little, well, it's not that older adults need more. It's that somehow as we age, we kind of stop eating as much protein. People's appetites just kind of go down a little. Maybe you drop from 3 meals to 2 meals. Maybe some of those proteins get harder to chew or digest. So in general, we want to just keep our eye on protein as we age. We don't need to go too crazy, but there is guidance to try to get about 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight. And I'm gonna paste this in to our chat. I pulled this from Up to Date, actually, if you guys are familiar with that, because it's kind of always changing. So if you calculate, if you find your weight in kilograms, divide your pounds by 2.2, and that's your weight in kilograms. And then you would multiply that by 1.6 up to 2.2 grams per kilogram to find out how many grams of protein you should be eating a day. This says 250 grams would be the max that we would ever recommend. So that's quite a lot of protein. And I just want to make a point that everybody's body is different. So you may find that you're retaining muscle and you're staying strong with much less, maybe closer to that 1.6 zone. But as you're, at the MOVE program, they're offering these body composition assessments, and I think that's available for employees too. So that could be a way that you're tracking your muscle as you continue to age. So in summary, skip the supplements, see if you can get all of those anti-inflammatory foods just from anti-inflammatory nutrients from actual foods, rather than looking for all of the different supplements that might be out there. Really focus on those anti-inflammatory proteins as you are working to get enough protein as you continue to age. That was a lot to squeeze into 28 minutes. So thank you guys for your patience with my sharing. And we have a couple of minutes if anybody has any other questions.
Thank you so much, Marcie. Hopefully my mic is working. Tech is being really slow.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, great. Marcie, that was great. Thank you so much, especially for those handouts that you added in, and for sharing with us different resources and different ways to think about what we're putting on our plate, which I think ties in beautifully with this week's challenge. So let's see, Deb says you did well getting all that in. Way to go, Marcie. All right, and then any questions from the group? People saying thank you, appreciate this. Awesome presentation. Okay, guys, well, just a couple closing announcements then. Thank you so much, Marcie. Oh, Stacy, did you have a question? I saw you raise your hand. Okay, sounds good. No problem. All right, guys. Well, let me share my screen here. We'll just go over our quick wrap-up announcements. do, do, do. All right, guys. And I see Marcie also put the plant-based cookbook is also great for meal planning. So check that out. Nutritionva.gov has so many great recipes. And so if you guys have any follow-up questions, I know Marcie's such a great resource. So we're really happy to have had her present today. Um, for the presentation that was canceled yesterday with Madison because she was out sick, we will be rescheduling that for next week on Friday at 11:30 a.m. So that leaves the last seminar for this week is mindfulness with healthy eating. So I'll be leading you guys through a mindful moment on Thursday. So please bring a snack like an apple. You can even bring a mint or gum, or even your lunch too. And so we'll enjoy a mindful moment walking you through so you can enjoy the sensorial experience of enjoying a meal, slowing everything down. A couple of reminders to turn in your points for last week to your team leader. Ideally, we want this moving forward Tuesdays no later than 8 a.m., but we know we're in week one. And then team captains need to submit this information no later than Thursday 8 a.m. So we really recommend by tomorrow the team captain turns in all of the points for everybody. You do get 25 points if you attended today's seminar or you're watching the recording. And you get 25 points for completing one of the tasks on the weekly challenge. And we do have all the recordings for the prior seminars on our SharePoint site, so check that out. And as a reminder, this week's wellness challenge is about food and drink with rainbow and hydration. So incorporating 6 whole foods in every color of the rainbow. So kind of like Marcie was talking about today with moderation. Um, Stay hydrated and keep a food journal daily and track your calories. So those are one of the 3 options that you can pick from. And as you gain your points this week. So here we go. So with that, let's see. I see Scott posted in the chat. I'm about done with the first 32-ounce Nalgene of water. Excellent. Good job with your hydration, Scott. And make sure you guys are sharing your goals for the week with your teammates and your family and friends. And so keep that up. We're cheering you guys on. Thank you guys so much for being here. And we'll wrap up for today. See you Thursday, we hope. Bye.